Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer McGuire, and I'm very thankful that you've stopped by. Today I'm revisiting Distress Oxide Sprays. I did a little bit with Distress Oxide Sprays in a video a few weeks ago, and I'll link to it here if you've missed it. But I had so much fun with them that I thought I'd come back and do another technique. Now, the reason I like the Distress Oxide Sprays is you can create unique backgrounds very quickly, and there are many fun techniques you can do. Today, I'm focusing on a resist technique that gives beautiful, smooth, suede-like results. My examples are pretty clean and simple, but if you want to check out the crazy cool backgrounds that you can do by layering and mixing things together, be sure to check out the video that I have linked up here that Tim Holtz did. It's amazing what you can do with these sprays. I'm kind of doing a more clean and simple version, so it's nice that you can get many different looks out of one product. So these are the Tim Holtz Distress Oxide Sprays. They are a unique fusion of dye and pigment ink in one. And they create this really cool oxidize effect when sprayed with water. Now let me tell you a little bit more about the dye and pigment. Now dye ink is usually clear, like translucent. Pigment ink is more opaque. So when you put it on a dark cardstock, the color shows up. Because this is a mix of both, you can get really cool effects. I'll talk throughout this video about the things you can do with those properties, and also more about that oxidized effect. I do want to mention you want to shake these side to side before using, and you always want to wipe the nozzle off so that it doesn't get clogged, but I've never had any problems with that. And by the way, I'm sorry that I have several Band-Aids on today. I used a hot glue gun to make Lila's costume with her, and let's just say I need to stick to paper crafting because I was a hot mess, so I apologize for that. Okay, let's get started with this first example. With this one, I did a bit of layering on the background with the snowflakes and also a fun resist technique. For this card and many others in today's video, I'm using the Tim Holtz Swirly Snowflake stamp set. I had to get this one because of the large, unique snowflake designs. And by the way, he does have another set with matching snowflakes that are smaller. Okay, so I'm using my MISTI stamping tool today, and I have some Hero Arts nautical cardstock in there. That's that navy cardstock. I'm arranging some of the snowflakes towards the bottom of this and using my anti-static powder tool since I'm going to heat emboss. We're doing a fun emboss resist technique with our sprays. So I'm inking up my stamps with Versamark Ink. I'll stamp that onto the navy cardstock, and then we will add clear embossing powder and heat set. Now you can use Distress Oxide Sprays on any color cardstock you want. That's one of the great things about that pigment property that they have. So I'm going to do some examples where I use dark cardstocks and also do some examples with lighter cardstocks. But I'll be honest, I really like the look of the Oxide Sprays on the darker colors. Okay, now it's time to do some spraying, so I'm putting it into a box so I don't make a mess on my work surface. And now I'm going to spray some tumbled glass Distress Oxide ink towards the bottom of my cardstock, down where the snowflakes are, so that the color is heavier down there and lighter towards the other end. Right away, you can see how the color shows up even though we're working on a darker cardstock. Okay, so after spraying a bit of this, I'm going to do some layering for this example. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple other colors. But because I want a really clean look, I'm going to go ahead and try to dry this a bit. I'm using the Wow Dual Speed Heat tool on the lower setting. If I keep this moving, I find that this will dry it without reactivating the embossing powder, but you definitely could use whatever heat gun you have. Okay, so now I'm adding some Peacock Feathers Distress Oxide Spray right over that, and then we'll go ahead and dry that again. You really don't need to dry between each step, but I really wanted a clean look. Now with these sprays, if you press the nozzle fully, you get a nice mist. If you press it partially or just go a little bit, then you get more of the splatter. And I'm trying to get a bit of both in this case, but mostly the mist. So I'm pressing pretty firmly in each case. I'm going to use that same last color, which was Salty Ocean, to make some little droplets in the background. I like to take the nozzle out, tap a little bit of the excess off onto the box, and then tap on my paper. And that gives me beautiful droplets that will stand out nicely on that dark cardstock. Okay, once again, I'm just going to dry that. You can let this dry on your own or just continue to layer things, but I wanted, again, that cleaner look. Now I felt like I used a lot of blues and I wanted to bring in another color, but just a little bit, so I used a little bit of wilted violet, a purple, and added that too. So this really doesn't take long. I'm just adding a spray and drying a bit, adding some splotches and drying it a bit, and you can build up whatever color you want. Again, because this has that pigment property to it, that opaque property, you can build colors on top of each other, which is really fun to do. Now don't be afraid to mix in other products with your Distress Oxide Sprays. I decided to also use Hero Art's White Iridescent Shimmer Spray. By the way, those tattoos aren't real. People were asking about that. Christina Werner did them temporarily on me when I saw her last weekend, so that's why I have those. Okay, anyways, with this White Iridescent Shimmer Spray, I wanted to add a little splatter to the background. You can also use your Distress Oxide Sprays with your original Distress Sprays, the regular Distress. And you can also use them with any kind of pearlescent water or shimmer sprays that you may have. So it's fun to really mix them up and do different things together. In this case, I just added splatter in the background. Now, while I was doing all this, notice that those clear heat embossed snowflakes resisted the color I put on top because it's slick, so the inks don't want to stay on it. That's why that dark color is trapped under the clear embossing. That's going to be really fun in the final effect, which we'll get to in a moment. I wanted to add a little more subtle stamping on the background, very subtle. So I'm lightly stamping with the Tim Holtz Distress Oxide Ink on top. That's tumbled glass. I wanted it to be a lighter look. I could choose a darker ink if I'd prefer. Now remember, when Distress Oxide Sprays or Distress Oxide Ink come in contact with water, they kind of oxidize. They basically become a little more white. Or for me, it seems like they kind of switch on. See how when I mist this lightly with water, that background stamping that I just did intensifies a bit. It's almost like you flipped a light switch and it pops a bit more. And same with the background. I only used a light mist of water. If you wanted to have more layering and a lot more faux dimension to this, you definitely want to use a lot more water. Now I could leave those heat embossed snowflakes shiny as they are, but I want to make them stand out even more. So I decided to do iron off embossing. So basically we're going to remove the embossing powder from those large snowflakes. So all you need to do is take some towels and set it on your work surface, lay your background on that, then put a piece of scrap paper, or I'm using printer paper, on top. Then you use an iron on the highest setting with no steam, and then rub across it. And what happens is this transfers the embossing powder from your background onto that white paper. So this ends up being a background that's smooth and matte and just beautiful. And those snowflakes that we originally heat embossed stand out even more now. I'll talk more about using an iron to remove your embossing powder throughout this video. But also, I did a video a few weeks ago that I'll link to here, where I showed how you can use iron off embossing with ink. So if you don't have the sprays, you can still do this technique. Now, before we move on to other technique and background examples, let's complete this card. On this card, I used the Simon Says Stamp Marie Snowflake die, and also the Birch Press Sugar Script Hello die, which I've used many, many times in videos. Now first, for the snowflake, I die cut it 3 times from white cardstock, and then once from silver glitter cardstock, and glued those together for a stacked look, and that's what you see on the left. Now this one here on the right that I'm adding tape to the background, I wanted to keep the inside pieces of that white die cut together, so that they would show through when I glued them behind my silver die cut. So there would be like a solid area behind there. So by putting tape on the back, I'm able to hold those pieces in place. Now I'm going to glue that snowflake onto our background. By the way, I trimmed my background down to 4 1/4 by 5 inches, and I added it onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. Now I have a little sentiment strip. I want it to have dimension too, and instead of using foam tape behind it because it's so thin, I just cut 2 thin strips of cardstock and layered them behind it. This gives a nice secure dimension to this thin cardstock strip that I have my sentiment on. It's also a great way to use up those thin strips of cardstock that you have left over sitting around. Here I have the Hello die cut. I die cut it 3 times from that nautical cardstock and glued them together so it had the dimension, and I'll add that on top too. So that Hello die cut is what our background cardstock originally started as, and we completely changed the look using those oxide sprays. Now on top of the Hello die cut, I added mini glossy accents. The glossy accents give shine and help to make it stand out against that darker background. And finally, I added some Studio Katia Icy Sparkle Crystals. These are my newest obsession. These are clear gems that have like a shimmery, iridescent, glittery inside, which just makes it beautiful, and it matches all the shimmer that I usually like to put on my cards. I'm crazy about these, and I use them several times throughout this video. Okay, so here's the completed card. On the background, you can see those navy snowflakes that really were just clear heat embossed in the beginning. Then we used the oxide sprays to do some clean layering in the background, and then we ironed off the embossing for that smooth suede look. This is one of those that I wish you could see in real life because the background is very unique, and I've never been able to achieve this kind of look, this kind of suede smooth look with anything other than the oxide sprays or the oxide inks. Okay, by the way, the sentiment that says "you are full of magic" is from the Gray Muse You Grow Girl stamp set. This is a great, encouraging stamp set, and I thought that full of magic message was perfect for this card. Okay, now for my next example, and this one is super quick and shows how oxide sprays can be used to create unique looks very quickly. Now off screen, I went ahead and clear heat embossed the same snowflakes onto a piece of Hero Art's Arctic cardstock, which is a great dark teal color. Now I'm going to put that into my box, and I'm spraying just lightly from one end kind of towards the other with the Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide Spray. That's all I did, was I sprayed it a bit, and now I'm drying it just so I don't have to be patient and wait for it to dry on its own. And now I'm going to leave this as is. I'm not going to do anything else. I love that soft mist that you can get with these sprays. And because it has that opaque property, you can see the light blue against the dark blue cardstock. Okay, so now I'm going to iron off that embossing for a smooth look. You could skip this, but I really think it helps give a more intense look. So I put some printer paper on top, then added the iron over it. Again, I'm doing a high heat setting, and you want to use a clean piece of paper each time. I just save these papers afterwards to use as scrap paper for other things. You can also iron off onto another piece of cardstock and continue to do another technique, which I showed in that other video. But in this case, check out that very simple background that we get. I trimmed it down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. And I white heat embossed a simple sentiment and added more of those icy crystal jewels. Here you can see up close how those snowflakes have a smooth, unique look with that mist of color around it. Such a beautiful, quick card to make. This would be one that you could quickly make a bunch of to send out to friends and family for the holidays. By the way, that heat embossed sentiment is from the Studio Katia Gift Tag Greetings stamp set. Okay, this next example is similar to the last, but I added a bit more color to the background. I started this time with nautical cardstock, navy cardstock from Hero Arts, and did the clear heat embossed snowflakes. On that, I misted a little bit of Salty Ocean Distress Oxide Spray. Now I'm going to do some splatter of colors. This is Twisted Citron, and I love how that stands out against that dark background. I then let that dry, and now I'm doing some Wilted Violet. Now the reason I'm drying between splatters is that if they land on top of each other, they'll then layer instead of kind of mixing together. Again, I'm going for a really clean look. Now I'm adding some Salty Ocean droplets here and there, but remember I only did one mist across the bottom. Now I'm coming in with that Hero Arts White Iridescent Shimmer Spray. It started to settle, so I needed to shake it before adding it, and now I'm going to add some speckles of that too. So all I'm doing is adding these droplets of color to the background. And again, that clear embossing resists it, but you can see how some of the color is settling on the clear embossing. That's why I want to iron it off. It'll bring it back to a very clean look. So I have it on my towels. I'm putting a clean piece of printer paper on top and adding my iron to remove that embossing powder. Now, in my other video, people asked if you could use a laminator to remove the embossing powder. I tried with the laminators that I have, and I wasn't successful, but you definitely could try it if you want to. I found that the iron was easy enough to do. Okay, so now after removing all of that embossing powder, check out the clean, dark snowflakes that we have against that bright, colorful pattern that we've created with the sprays. It also has a very smooth, matte, kind of suede-looking finish. I again trimmed it down and added it to a white note card and white heat embossed the sentiment and added more of the Studio Katia Icy Crystals. I have to say that this is probably my favorite way to use Distress Oxide Sprays, where you use a little bit of the oxide sprays in both mist and splatter on a dark background so that those colors pop. They almost look like they glow. By the way, that sentiment is from this Pinkfresh Studio Merry Days stamp set. This is a great set, and I thought that sentiment was perfect with the snowflakes. Okay, in my next example, I'm going to do a lot more layering and add some water into our backgrounds with the Distress Oxide Sprays, which helps to create a little bit of that oxide look. Okay, so this time I'm using Tim Holtz watercolor paper, so we're starting with a white background. I am again going to clear heat emboss some of the same snowflakes, just like we did before. This time I'm going to be more generous with my Distress Oxide Sprays. First, I'm using broken china. And notice the inside of my box has a really cool effect from all that layered oxide spray. So from now on, I'm going to put paper in there to capture that extra spray, and I can cut out little pieces to use on my card. And I'll show you that later. Next, I use some Salty Ocean. This time, I'm using some Blueprint Sketch. And oh, by the way, that first one wasn't broken china, it was peacock feather. And then finally, I'm coming in with Pine Needles, which is a beautiful bluish green. Okay, so now we have this beautiful background that we could use as is. Just let it dry, and you get that kind of misty, speckled background. The nice thing is because I layered a lot here, it ends up giving this beautiful blended look, which, I always try to achieve with inks and ink blending tools, but this is a really fast way to add a lot of color to a background. Okay, so once this was dry, I noticed I still had some color on top of my embossing. So I'm just going to lay a paper towel on that to pick up that extra, just so I can keep that embossing powder kind of clean as we add more to this. You could stop here and skip right to the iron off of the embossing powder and have this very suede-y looking background, but I'm going to add some water to this to get that oxidized look. So now I've put it back into my box here, and I'm going to spray it with water. I like to use the Tim Holtz sprayer because if you push the nozzle completely, it comes out more as a mist. And if you do it partially, it comes out more as splatter or drops. So I did a combination of both. You can see here where it landed on our oxide, it turns a little white, or it actually looks like it's kind of highlighted, like it turned on a bit. And it really adds a fun layered look. Now, once again, I'm going to dab some of the excess off from around the embossing, and you can continue to add as many layers as you want. You could also spray on some more of the oxide spray along with some water to create more of that oxidized look, but instead I'm going to just add a little speckles, and then I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to do some stamping before the iron off embossing. So I'm layering the sprays with some splatter with some stamping. All along, those clear heat embossed snowflakes are resisting the color we put on top. Okay, so now I'm coming in with Blueprint Sketch and just stamping some snowflakes on the background. One of the advantages of using Distress Oxide ink is it has that pigment property, so you can stamp with color on top of color and it'll show up. If you used a dye ink, the dye ink is more translucent, so the color of cardstock would show through the ink. Okay, so there's my layered background. Now it's time to do that iron off embossing, which will allow those white snowflakes to show more. By removing the clear embossing, we remove the shine and the color that might have been sitting on top, and we're left with a very smooth, matte, suede-like background. Okay, I wanted to add a few more smaller snowflakes in the background, and I didn't have the other Tim Holtz set, so I'm using the Studio Katia. I really like the design of these snowflakes also, and the small sentiments that would fit at the center of the snowflakes. So I'm stamping these smaller ones with Chipped Sapphire Distress Oxide Ink. Again, I chose the oxide so that the color would sit more on the surface and be opaque and allow it to show up against that colored background. If you wanted to, you could do a light mist of water to this, which would allow those Distress Oxide inks to look like they glow a bit more, but I just left it as is. So I added this to a bottom of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card, and I added more of those icy crystals and a thankful die cut at the top. It felt like I had a lot of layering on that background and I wanted it to show. So that's why I cut the piece large and put the sentiment towards the top with a very simple design. Okay, it's time to do some examples using a different stamp set. In this case, I used one image on dark green cardstock and I added a bunch of Distress Oxide sprays and water for a fun background. This time I'm using the Tim Holtz Pressed Foliage stamp set. This is a favorite of mine from this year because of the detail of these leaves and because they're large. You can cover a whole background or use one alone as I'm doing today. For this card, I'm using the largest leaf and I'm clear heat embossing it onto Hero Art's Palm cardstock, which is a nice olive green cardstock. Now I'm going to start with one color of Distress Oxide spray that I didn't have much interest in using until I saw Tim use it in one of his videos, and it really gives a cool look. So this is old paper, which really looks like the old paper in old textbooks. Well, what it does is it kind of gives like a glow, a foundation that you can add other colors on. At least that's how I used it for my example here. So I put down some of the old paper. Now I'm coming in with some Twisted Citron for a little bright color. Then I came in with some Mowed Lawn, which is one of the ink pads that I used quite often. Now finally I came in and added a little bit of Pine Needle just for a little bluish color to it. This time I'm going to add water on top so we can get that oxidized look. So basically, as I add water here, you'll see how it turns a little bit whiter in certain areas wherever I added the water. And you get movement of color and get this fun look. Now I'm going to use my gun here to dry this a little bit, and you can see how the color kind of settles in. You have some oxidation looking going on the edge, some color building up, all around that heat embossed leaf that we have in the center. There you can see some of the white on the background. Really, I feel like when you add water to the oxide inks or sprays, it just makes it glow. It's really cool. Now you can go to town here. You can add as much as you want to this to get a lot of variation in the background. I decided to just do this much, let it dry, and let it do its thing. The color will kind of pull back a little bit and we'll end up with a very smooth background that has like this patina look to it. Now, if you don't have the Distress Oxide sprays, you can use Distress Oxide inks for a technique similar to this. Just direct to paper apply some of the ink over your heat embossed image, spray it with water, and get lots of movement of color. But I tell you, the sprays are really easy to use, and I like the mist that you can get. Okay, next I'm going to iron off that embossing powder so that that leaf image stands out more in the middle there. Remember, we started with a dark green cardstock, so that leaf will end up being a matte dark green color in the center, and check out all the detail we were able to keep. And I like that the inks kind of pool around it to make it stand out more. Okay, for the sentiment on this one, I used the Hello Bluebird Thankful for You die set. This has thankful and grateful and a little block that says for you, and I like the styles of these. So I die cut thankful 3 times from white cardstock and glued them together and added it to the center of our background. I trimmed our background down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card, and also added 2 thin cardstock white strips down the edge. There you can see the beautiful layering that I was able to get with the Distress Oxide sprays. Not too much craziness in the background because I wanted to keep the detail of the leaf, but it definitely adds a lot of interest and a very smooth suede look in real life. By the way, I have lots of scraps left over because I started with a bigger piece of cardstock, and I can save these for future scraps card videos, so you'll probably see those in the future. Okay, using that same leaf stamp set, I created this card with lots of colors in the background, but still a very smooth, clean look. This time I white heat embossed the leaf onto Tim Holtz watercolor paper. You can use regular cardstock, but when you're adding a lot of water, it is helpful to use a watercolor paper. Okay, this time I got smart and I put a piece of black cardstock into my box so I could capture all that excess spray. So I put that down first, and I'm going to actually mist my embossed piece with water first. This will allow the sprays to start moving right away, and you start getting oxidation right away. I'm adding old paper, wild honey, and ripe persimmon sprays, and a tiny bit of mowed lawn and festive berries. I like that you can use lots of different colors together and end up with a really beautiful look using the oxide sprays. Sometimes when I would use dye sprays, the colors would mix together and you just end up with kind of a brown color. But thanks to the properties of the oxide sprays, you can layer them together and get beautiful looks. Now you could stop here, but I decided to add more. But check out the background in my box that I have here. All that black cardstock is capturing all the excess spray, and it is such a beautiful look. So I'll let that dry and I can use that on another card. So after adding a little more spray and a little more water, you can see that background that we're creating with lots of color. You've got a bit of glow to it because of that oxidation. And we can keep adding colors to this if we wanted to. I wanted kind of a softer look to this, but you can definitely go darker if you want to. Using these sprays has been really fun for me because it's kind of out of my comfort zone. But there are so many things you can do with it, and you can create backgrounds very quickly. So I'm going to let that dry on its own for a bit. And remember, I also have that cardstock that was in the box that captured all the extra spray. You can see all the oxidation happening there in the background because I used both water and the spray inside of the box. So we'll let that one dry too. Okay, so after my leaf background's done, I'll go ahead and do the iron off embossing once again. Same process as before. And what we end up with is a very smooth background with a suede feel to it. Now I could leave this as is, but I decided to add a little bit of darker color around the edge. That will make it stand out even more on our white note card. So this is Gathered Twigs Distress Oxide Ink, and I'm applying a light amount towards the edge. But then I really wanted the edge to stand out even more. So I decided to come in with my Gathered Twigs Distress Ink, not the oxide, but the regular ink, and use the ink blending tool kind of sideways along the edge. So watch how I'm doing that. I'm just kind of going sideways, and that gives a very dark edge, which allows it to stand out even more and creates even more of a glowing feeling to that background because you have that bit of contrast. So I've added that to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch white note card. And I kept the rest very simple. I die cut the Grateful 3 times from white cardstock and once from Lawn Fawn Autumn Sparkle cardstock. It's like a brown glitter paper that's just gorgeous, or a copper. And I added that right onto the center of our card. This allows a lot of that background to show. And because we did the brown around the edge and use oxide sprays, it looks like the center actually glows a bit. Really fun to do, and again, you could do this with distress inks, but the sprays make it very fast to do. And by the way, remember that cardstock that was in the box that captured all of our excess spray? Well, here they are dried. You can see the oxidation that happened where it kind of looks white and glows. And look at that beautiful color against that black cardstock background. These will definitely be fun for quick cards, so I'll definitely save these scraps for a future video. Okay, we have one more example, and this shows how using background stamps is really effective when doing this iron off emboss resist with oxide sprays. This time I'm using the Tim Holtz Ornate and Lace background stamps. There are 2 stamps on here, and I'm going to use the Ornate one. I once again will clear heat emboss this onto Hero Art's Arctic cardstock. You could use any color of cardstock here or even white, but I wanted the dark color to show through. This background will be very quick to make. I'm first just adding a bunch of different colors of oxide spray. I think I used peacock feathers, pine needles, wilted violet, and tumbled glass. A lot of people ask what colors that I recommend getting. Really, whatever colors you reach for often are the ones to try out. Okay, so this looks really cool as is, but now I'm adding water to it. And what will happen is you get that oxidation happening where it turns the ink a little bit white and makes it glow. And it's all kind of pooling up between all of that heat embossing. There's a lot of embossing on this background, and it's resisting all this ink we put on top. So it kind of pools up, which creates a really neat effect around the embossing. So I'm going to dry this a bit, and then I will do the iron off embossing, which will even make it better. Techniques like this are really fun for me because I end up with a background very quickly, and I can add simple die cuts or stamped images to create a quick card. Here's a closer look at the results. Really beautiful, and it took very little effort. Here's the final card. I trimmed the background down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch note card. I then added stacked white die cuts and a simple sentiment strip. The sentiment is from the My Favorite Things Bitty Holiday stamp set, and the die cuts are from the My Favorite Things Peace on Earth die sets. Okay, so I hope that this second video on Distress Oxide inks shows you more ways to use them. There are many, many ways, and if you're interested, I can do some more videos in the future. If you are interested in the videos I talk about or the supplies that I use, I have them linked in my description below. Also, always look at the pinned comment in the comments below because if I have additional thoughts or frequently asked questions, I'll answer those there. In the middle are a couple other videos that are related. I appreciate you spending this time with me today, and we'll see you again very soon.